Hello, everybody, and happy Thursday. We got one more day to the weekend. We are so close. We're almost there. But today, we're not quite at the weekend yet. We have a really important talk to have today. And today, I am joined by Autumn Robinson. Now, Autumn is a Mountain Brook native, which if you are outside of Birmingham, it is a suburb that lies right outside of Birmingham and about right outside of Birmingham proper, I should say. So Autumn is here today to talk about an online petition that she has helped organize to end the Birmingham Belles. Now, if you are not familiar with the Birmingham Belles, it is a debutante-style event that features teenagers, about 100 or so teenagers, teenage girls, or teenage women, I should say, wearing antebellum-style dresses and outfits at an event that has been held at Arlington House. If you're not familiar again with Birmingham, Arlington House and Gardens is an antebellum home that was built in the 1840s, and it is located in the city limits of Birmingham. So Autumn is here today to explain a little bit about why this petition was started to end the Birmingham Belles, what her feelings are, and what some of her former classmates who actually were Birmingham Belles, why they now have kind of shifted their mindset and why they believe that the Birmingham Belles should also be no more. So Autumn, thanks so much for coming today and having this really important conversation with us. And this is definitely a time where topics like this we see are coming up more and more in the news. And I would love to hear about one, your experience, if you were a Birmingham Belle, if you weren't, maybe your feelings about that. And also maybe about how when you grew up in Mountain Brook, you had a lot of classmates that were Birmingham Belles.
Yeah, so growing up, my family lived in Mountain Brook. I attended Mountain Brook schools from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And probably for the first 10 years of my time in Mountain Brook, my family was the only Black family in the city, at least in Crestline where we were. And so getting into high school, I kind of just learned how to navigate my way through, being the only Black face in a very large group of white people. And I remember, I just kind of assumed that the things that they did were the things that I did. And I never saw a difference between me and my classmates. And so when something like the Birmingham Belles came up, I just, without much knowledge of what it was, I just assumed it was something that people did. And so when I found out that, one, I was not invited to do it, and that a majority of the people who did do it were actually white women, I think at first thought at, I guess, 16 or 17, I was like, well, maybe, it's a tradition where if your mom did it, you do it. There's a lot of things in Mountain Brook that are like that. But then I started to see there are other people who didn't get selected. And though they weren't Black, I did begin to see the exclusivity of the Birmingham Belles. And I would say I didn't think about it in much detail then. It just made me uncomfortable and kind of rubbed me the wrong way that there were a bunch of my white female classmates dressed in antebellum style dresses at a former plantation home in the middle of a Black community, a majority Black community in the city. And so, no, I was not invited to do it. I think I never fully processed how that made me feel or what that meant to me until recently. But I do remember questioning a little bit, feeling uncomfortable, and not really knowing why.
And one of my producers is going to drop a link here. We do have more information about Arlington Home and Gardens that you can read about. Again, that is a mansion that was built in the 1840s. There were slaves that were on that property as well. And there are questions about Arlington House and its future. Again, we'll put that here in the comments and you can read about the house specifically. But I want to get back to this petition, Autumn. Now, you and your former classmate, her name's Emily Owen Mendelson, Emily Owen double name. And you and Emily Owen started this petition. And what I think is interesting is she was a Birmingham Belle. And in this petition, which is on change.org, it's called #NoMoreBelles. This, the description on this petition I thought was really interesting because Emily Owen says that this is a racist and harmful to Black people event. And she also said that this is, quote, an excuse for white women to play plantation for a day. Do you agree with those?
So I would say it is definitely challenging to kind of pick at this, I would say. But I think that because the situation is taking place on land and at a house where there actually were slaves present, while there's clearly a celebration of our past Southern history, it is walking around and celebrating that. And so that is challenging to talk about and to dissect. But I do think that Emily Owen brought up some really great points because, especially because Black people do not participate in that, I think only further exacerbates the issue of marginalizing that community and making it clear that this is something that is for white people to celebrate their Southern heritage and not all the other parts of history that maybe are not worth celebrating.
We're going to get into that, talk about history in just a second, but I do want to go ahead and note, I think it's important to say that Arlington House, that event, the Birmingham Belles, did not happen this year in 2020. The house has been closed to public events since March because of the pandemic. But interestingly, the house, and this was included in a recent Washington Post article that really highlighted yours and Emily Owen's petition. But the director of Arlington Home has sent a request to the Birmingham Belles to discontinue wearing antebellum clothing if they, meaning the Birmingham Belles, hold any further events there. So we do know that Arlington House has put down their foot and said this is not going to happen, at least in the way that it has happened since the 60s when Birmingham Belles were founded. Now, also in that Washington Post article, a representative from the Birmingham Belles told the Post they would be seeking a new venue for further events. So I do just want to go ahead and note that here off the top. But Autumn, you made this point about history, about celebrating history, and that's a lot of people, especially in the South, that say during this conversation of removing Confederate monuments, of plantation-style homes or plantation homes where slaves actually once lived and worked, there is a lot of conversation about taking those things down and saying you can't erase history, saying why are we trying to erase history? You can't change history, etc. What is your response to those people?
Yeah, so I love this question. I think that erasure of history is practically non-existent. It would be very difficult to erase a history because history is something that we carry with us through story, in our own personal experience. Things get passed down. We have textbooks that have been made to list out everything that has happened in the past. And I think that there's a difference between erasing history and choosing not to celebrate the dark parts of history that you wouldn't be celebrating if it was happening now. It wouldn't be something that you would be dressing up and getting together and having a picnic and good food because it's not something that is worth celebrating. And I know Emily Owen in the article kind of hearkened this situation to our people in Germany celebrating things that happened during the Holocaust. Absolutely not. And so history is going to exist regardless. If you take down a Confederate monument, we still know that that person existed. There's no reason to have this person revered. Just because you're taking the statue down does not mean that you're erasing this person from the history books. You're just saying we're choosing not to acknowledge what this person did and pretend that they did something great when overall they harmed people. And I think it's the same case for the Birmingham Belles. It is great that we have such amazing culture in the South. I think that the South is one region of the country that is very clear and distinct because of our culture, our modern culture and our past culture. And so I think let's celebrate how good we are at football. Let's celebrate how good we are at cooking. Let's celebrate our accents that are beautiful and our way of life and our sweet tea. But when it comes to things where there are people harmed, there are people oppressed, there's a way to say these things happened. We're not going to celebrate them. Let's move forward and celebrate the traditions that we have that are beautiful and inclusive and make up a culture of every color, every age, and every race.
I think that hits the nail on the head for sure there. Now, we've got some people asking where the petition is. It's on change.org. It's called #NoMoreBelles, and that's BELLES as well. And also, if you need a link, if you go to that story I was talking about the future of Arlington Home, There is a link that is in that story talking about this petition, and you can find the petition there. If you have trouble, let me know, and either I or one of our producers will get you to that. Just wanted to go ahead and address that on some of the comments coming in. Now, Autumn, I think that it's interesting. You said earlier we were talking about this history argument and about not celebrating these parts of history that are harmful to other people, and about those parts of history that are not inclusive to all people. And I think that it was interesting. You made the point about the Belles being held, the Birmingham Belles event being held on Arlington's property is almost like dancing on that horrible part of history. Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so when I was actually speaking to E.A. Brown, who wrote the article for the Washington Post, she did a lot of great research, and she mentioned to me that there was actually, I think, 7 slaves who were on the property of the Arlington House, and one of them was actually a 17-year-old girl. And I don't want to make assumptions of the things that she probably experienced there, but it's not something that I want to think about, and it's not something that I assume was great. And you think about that situation and you say, here's Arlington House. There's a 17-year-old girl who was a slave there. And my guess would be that the people who lived there and the females who lived there probably wore those exact same dresses while she experienced very horrible things that someone her age should not have experienced because she was a human being. And so then you take 150 years later, you have a bunch of girls in those exact same dresses prancing around and celebrating for what? This is not something that is worth celebrating. There were people who were harmed in that place, and they were harmed by women who looked just like these women that are walking around on this former plantation home. And that is, in and of itself, I can't understand how people couldn't hear that and still think that what's going on is okay.
I want to ask you, so like we said, the Birmingham Belles, and I'm looking at the dates right now, started in 1969 through 2019. It was held at Arlington Home. Again, we know the director has recently said that they had told the Birmingham Belles that they would have to change their attire if they wanted to have future events at the property. So my question to you is twofold. Number one, do you believe that the Birmingham Belles, in its current state with the antebellum-style dresses, would be less harmful if it was held on a different property that was not a former plantation? And as a follow-up to that question, as a second part to that question, do you think that the Birmingham Belles would be more appropriate and could be more inclusive if the antebellum style dresses were just gone away with and the Belles was just more of a service oriented type of event?
Yes. So I think as it currently stands, the antebellum dresses and with the combination of the former plantation home is a problem. And I think that what the Birmingham Belles do is great. And I never wanted there to be the perception that I didn't believe that what the Birmingham Belles was doing was worth something, because I think that women with accomplishments and women who are serving their community, they should be acknowledged. That is completely fair. And they should also have the opportunity to continue to service the community and get to do that with other like-minded women. But when it comes to the inclusivity of that, I think, one, let's modernize the Belles. I think it's great. Let's present people. That is a Southern tradition I have no problem with. And let's allow women to be acknowledged and to serve their community. But let's modernize it and not have it be at a plantation home and not have the antebellum dresses be something that is a part of that, because that's a part of the culture that is not worth celebrating. But I think the hospitality of the South is something that should be celebrated, and women should be able to do that. And I think it needs to be opened up to all women to get to participate, because at its current state, I think even if a Black woman was invited to be a part of the Birmingham Belles, I think that there would be probably a rejection of said offer or extreme hesitation, because that's not something that me as a Black woman, and I would assume other Black women, would feel comfortable celebrating. But I would love to be able to be included in serving our community. That's something that anyone should be able to do. And so you have to keep in mind that you said the Birmingham Belles started in 1969 when we were still very segregated. Like the foundation of the Birmingham Belles was made in a society where only white women would have been able to participate. And now here we are 40 years later, 50 years later, and it's still a white female organization. And so I think that there is a way to start looking at this and saying, where are we lacking inclusivity? Where are we celebrating something that shouldn't? And how can we modernize this organization to still be able to do all the great things about it without harming other people in doing so?
So I think that you mentioned something interesting, and something I saw when looking at the change.org petition is that many of the people signed. As of this morning, when I checked before we started this video, there was 1,839 signatures on that petition. But a lot of the people who signed and then who left notes in the comment section under where you can sign your name to the petition said that they were former Birmingham Belles. And I think it's very interesting that several former Birmingham Belles are now saying, I did this. I'm ashamed I did this. I did not understand the ramifications or the history behind what I did. And now I apologize, and I don't think it should happen anymore. Emily Owen Mendelson, who started this petition with you, was a Birmingham Belle. We need to make sure, again, that we iterate that.
Yeah.
And one other Birmingham Belle that spoke with, or former Birmingham Belle that spoke with the Washington Post, I thought it was very interesting, her take. She said that she, at the time, was honored to be invited to have that privilege. She said at the time, she said, this is a beautiful place. I'm walking around beautiful gardens, and I liked the idea of people looking at me. And I think that that is, I commend her for that bravery of saying that, because I think all of us at 17 would feel it's just a time in your life where if people want to look at you and you're wearing a pretty dress, it's easy to accept that without being able to understand the ramifications and the hurt that that could cause people. And so that woman that spoke with the Washington Post now says that after she participated in the Belles, she attended the next year. And when she attended, she felt completely different. And she felt that the whole event was very strange. And she said once she started doing some research, she was appalled and embarrassed of what she did and what she took part of. So I'd love to know your thoughts on some of these former Belles that said at the time they thought it was really a cool thing to do. But then once they learned a little bit more, they said, oh my gosh, how did I do that?
Yeah. So I think that it is a lofty ask to expect a 17-year-old to be able to make a decision to not participate in something like this, especially something that is tradition. You've seen women before you do the exact same thing, and then it's exclusive. You get invited to be a part of it. And so asking someone who is excited to be a part of this to make a decision to say, and also I think it wasn't really until now that people were even thinking about the depth of these kind of things that take place. And so I think it's a heavy ask to even assume that a 17-year-old would be able to have that discernment and wisdom to choose not to do that. But I do think that it is very valuable that these women have come forward and said, I participated in this. And now that I'm older and I have more experience and I have seen more of what Black people experience and how the history of slavery still affects them to this day, this is not something that I'm comfortable participating in. And when I originally thought about it, when in the wake of George Floyd's murder and reached out to Emily Owen, I wasn't even sure if she participated in it. I just was like, I was thinking about this and I wanted to know your thoughts. And then we were able to start a dialogue about it where me, with as much grace as I would offer anyone, I don't hold anything against the people who participated in that. And so we were able to have that conversation, that dialogue. And I think it's important that there are women who are stepping forward and saying that they did this and they're not okay with it, because it adds a perspective to the conversation that's necessary to begin a conversation about modernizing the Belles. I think that their voices are the most important, because if you have people who are dissenters on one end and have terrible things to say about the Belles, which I am not, I want to make that clear. And then on one end, you know, people who love it and praise it and don't see any issue with it, you're not going to be able to find a middle ground in figuring out how to make this organization better. But when you have people who have been on both ends and are in the middle and can say, I participated and I loved it then, but now I see the problems with it. Let's talk about it and figure out what we can do to make it better.
I think that it's really valuable that you and your former classmates who were in this organization that you see problems with, we're able to come together and have that conversation productively. And I think there's a lot of people who can learn from you and your classmates in whether they agree or disagree with this specific topic, but in the way you were able to frankly talk about it without arguing, without raising your voice, just having a very civil discussion. I think that that's really important to note. One thing I want to ask you is, so many people say, if you don't agree with this event, if you don't like it, then just don't go. What is your response to that?
Yeah, so I've definitely encountered a lot of people who have had the opposite opinion of me and who have been able to just simply say, just don't go, like just ignore it. But I think the problem with that is that I have a voice and I feel comfortable using it. And I also am a person who extends grace to people. And so I will put myself in the front line of this conversation because I believe that I have the compassion and the kindness to approach both sides. And so I think when people say, don't participate, don't go, I think that just is, it's kind of like sweeping something under the rug because it's still happening. And there's still people who maybe don't feel comfortable saying something that are really harmed by this event. Even if we didn't want to consider my opinions and the way it made me feel, and you wanted to call me a snowflake and say, I just am upset. There's a community of Black people who live around that house and in maybe situations that are very, it's not a great situation. And they look out their window and they see a bunch of white women in extremely expensive dresses with their family celebrating on the ground that, in their opinion, is probably the reason that they're in that current situation. And so you can pick apart who it harms. You can decide, don't show up, don't be there. But regardless, if the event's taking place in its current state, it is harming people. This is not something that you can just ignore. This is not you don't like vanilla ice cream, don't eat it. It's not that simple. And so I think looking at it and it's in a multifaceted way and being able to see that there are multiple nuances to this situation and multiple people who are affected by it makes it to where that's a moot point.
I'm watching our comments come in. That's why my eyes keep drifting. But I love your sister Olivia is here in our comment thread. Olivia is watching. Olivia, we appreciate you. I know Autumn is glad that you are here and watching it. Now, Autumn, is there anything else that needs to be said before, while you have this platform and as a young Black woman who is taking on this issue along with several of your other young white women that you know from Mountain Brook, what would you like to say to, I guess, sum up your experience in kind of taking on this battle?
Yeah, so I think it's very important for me to acknowledge my own experience and acknowledge where that currently leaves me now. And so I am a Black woman who grew up in Mountain Brook, experienced all the beautiful parts of living there and all the tough parts of being a Black woman growing up in Mountain Brook. I've experienced it all. And I also have left Alabama and done other things and gone on to go to the University of Southern California and experience different people. And I know that there are instances where we say things into an echo chamber. And I know that often on my social media and on the social media of a lot of people my age, we say things and it's like, and everyone agrees and everyone retweets and everyone reshares. And you never have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with someone who maybe does not agree with you. And I will say that there are conversations that I won't have if you are demeaning my humanity, questioning something that is out of my control, being racist, whatever it may be, I'm not going to engage in conversation with you. But if you genuinely want to have a conversation about something that has so many different pieces to it and has to be broken down in multiple conversations and with multiple people, then I'm willing to have that conversation. And so I think that the Birmingham Belles is a tiny issue in the midst of so many other things. And I think being able to come together and acknowledge this one thing in the midst of the whole ecosystem of problems that exist in the South and problems that exist in our country in regards to race, it's a conversation worth having. And so I'm willing to talk to women who participated and women who didn't and see, where is it that we can heal this divide? Where is it that we can heal some of the pain and the wounds that people are feeling because of it? And I think that we can also acknowledge that the Birmingham Belles is just the tip of the iceberg for a lot of people and a lot of institutions. This is the part that peaks up, but there's so much underneath it that still needs to be talked about. And so I think I'm someone who loves to start conversation, do it as boldly as I can, regardless of the response from people. And I think that the Birmingham Belles was a way to start that conversation, because you see where people fall on a lot of things. It seems like it's a tiny thing, but you see the beautiful parts of people who are really attached to tradition, and they love being a part of the South, and they want to be able to celebrate that. But then you also get to engage with people that, like me, who say, I love the South. I love being a part of the South. I love being a Southern belle, but I also can acknowledge that there are things that need to be changed. And so I know that there are people who are going to disagree, and there are going to be people who tell me that this is not worth talking about, or that I'm just too sensitive. But I think that it is a worthy cause, because it starts a bigger conversation. And if it starts a bigger conversation, then I'm willing to have that conversation.
Autumn, I think that's a great point to end on. I am so lucky to have had the chance to have a conversation with a fellow Southern belle today. I appreciate you and your time so much. And I know you were on West Coast time, so this is early for you. We will let you go, Autumn. But thank you again so much. Thank all of you for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.